What if everything we know about human history starts too late? What if an entire civilization existed before the first recorded timeline, and its traces are still being found today? There's a quiet assumption most of us grow up with, that history is a straight line. Primitive tools become farming, become cities, become empires. Simple, ordered, explained. But what if that line isn't straight at all? What if it's broken, interrupted, rewritten? Because scattered across the planet are discoveries that don't quite fit, structures that shouldn't exist, maps that shouldn't be accurate, knowledge that appears far too early. And the deeper you look, the more unsettling it becomes. Because this isn't about one anomaly, it's about a pattern that suggests something came before us. Not just earlier humans, but something organized, something advanced, something capable of shaping the world in ways we're only beginning to notice. Mainstream archaeology has answers for most things. It always does. But every now and then, something slips through, something that forces even experts to pause, hesitate, and quietly disagree. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Because if even one of these discoveries is misunderstood, then the timeline of human civilization doesn't just need adjusting, it needs rewriting. Take a moment and imagine it. A civilization existing thousands of years before what we call the beginning. Building, mapping, observing the stars, then disappearing so completely that only fragments remain. No clear records, no surviving cities in the way we expect, just traces. Buried under stone, hidden beneath oceans, encoded in places no one thought to look. And every time we uncover one of these traces, the same questions return. Who built this? How did they do it? And why does it seem too advanced for its time? Because here's the part no one likes to say out loud. If ancient humans were capable of more than we thought, or if something else existed alongside them, then everything we believe about progress, technology, and civilization starts to shift. Suddenly, the past isn't primitive anymore. It's unknown. And the unknown is dangerous, not because of what it proves, but because of what it suggests. Over the last century, archaeologists, engineers, and researchers have uncovered sites that defy easy explanation. Massive stone structures aligned with astronomical precision. Ancient maps that seem to depict coastlines before they were even discovered. Ruins buried so deep they predate the timeline of civilization itself. Individually, each one can be explained away, at least on the surface. But together, they tell a very different story, a story that doesn't quite belong in the textbooks. And this is where our journey begins. Not with a clear answer, but with a place that was never supposed to exist at all. Hidden beneath layers of earth for thousands of years, silent, untouched, waiting. Until one day, it was uncovered, and what emerged from the ground didn't just challenge history, it challenged the idea of when history even begins. Because the first discovery isn't just old, it's impossibly old, and what it reveals is where everything starts to fall apart. The first discovery begins in a place that rewrote the rules the moment it was uncovered. In the 1990s, on a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists made a discovery that wasn't supposed to exist, a site now known as Göbekli Tepe. At first glance, it looks like a collection of massive stone pillars arranged in circles. But here's where it gets strange. These stones are over 11,000 years old. That places them thousands of years before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before what we consider the birth of civilization. Each pillar weighs up to 20 tons. They're carved with detailed animal figures, lions, snakes, birds, etched with a level of precision that suggests skill, planning, and intention. This wasn't random. This was design. But according to the official timeline, humans at that point were still hunter-gatherers. No cities, no writing, no organized labor. So who built this, and how? The mainstream explanation suggests that early humans were more capable than we once believed, that small groups came together, organized themselves, and constructed these monumental structures for ritual or spiritual purposes. And that might be true. But here's what makes researchers uncomfortable. Sites like Göbekli Tepe require coordination, planning, knowledge of engineering, and most importantly, time. A lot of time. Some researchers believe Göbekli Tepe could be evidence of a forgotten culture, one that existed just before the end of the last ice age, a culture that may have had knowledge we've long since lost. Because if this level of complexity existed that far back, then history didn't begin here. It began earlier. And this is where things don't add up. Because halfway across the world, another discovery tells a story that sounds almost impossible. In 1929, a Turkish naval officer named Piri Reis presented a map. At first, it seemed like just another early chart of the known world. But when researchers took a closer look, something didn't make sense. The map appeared to show the coastline of South America with surprising accuracy. That alone wasn't unusual. But then they noticed something else. At the bottom of the map, there was a landmass, a detailed coastline that seemed to match Antarctica. There was just one problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. And even more disturbing, the coastline on the map appeared to show the continent without its ice cover, which would mean it was mapped thousands of years ago before it was buried under ice. The official explanation is cautious. Some historians argue that the map is simply distorted, that it represents South America extended downward, misinterpreted by later observers. And that's a reasonable argument. But here's where it gets strange. Because the map wasn't drawn from scratch. Piri Reis himself wrote that it was compiled using much older source maps, maps that already existed long before his time. So where did those maps come from? Some researchers suggest the possibility of lost cartographic knowledge, information passed down from a much older civilization, copied and recopied until only fragments remained. Because if ancient people were mapping coastlines with this level of accuracy, then they weren't just surviving. They were exploring and possibly documenting a world very different from our own. But just when it feels like the mystery couldn't get stranger, it does. Because deep beneath the ocean, off the coast of Japan, lies a structure that challenges everything we think we know about ancient construction. Discovered in 1986 near the island of Yonaguni, this massive underwater formation looks almost unreal. Terraced steps, sharp angles, flat surfaces that stretch for hundreds of feet. At first, it seems like a natural rock formation, but then you look closer. The edges are too straight, the layers too uniform, the layout too deliberate. Some divers describe it as a submerged city. The official explanation is that it's natural sandstone formation shaped by tectonic activity and ocean currents over thousands of years. And that explanation does account for some of its features, but not all of them. Because scattered around the site are what appear to be pillars, platforms, even something resembling a staircase. And this is what makes researchers pause. If even part of Yonaguni is man-made, then it would have been built before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago, which would place complex construction far earlier than our timeline allows. Some believe it could be the remains of a lost coastal civilization, submerged as the oceans rose, a culture that built along ancient shorelines, now buried beneath the sea. And if that's true, then how many more structures are out there, hidden, flooded, forgotten? Because the deeper we look, the more it starts to feel like we're not discovering something new, we're rediscovering something old. And the next discovery might be the one that connects it all.
By now, a pattern is starting to form. Structures that appear too early, knowledge that appears too advanced, and a timeline that feels incomplete. But the next discovery doesn't just challenge history, it challenges geography itself. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis wasn't the only one working with mysterious maps. Centuries later, another map surfaced, one that would push the mystery even further. It's known as the Orontius Phineus map, created in 1531. At first glance, it looks like a decorative Renaissance chart of the world. But here's where it gets strange. It appears to depict Antarctica, not as a vague outline, not as a guess, but as a detailed landmass, complete with rivers, mountains, and inland features. And this is where things don't add up, because Antarctica, as we know it today, is buried under miles of ice. Those features shouldn't be visible. They haven't been visible for thousands of years. The official explanation suggests imagination, that early cartographers filled in unknown regions with speculation, symmetry, or artistic interpretation. And that's a fair point. But some researchers argue that the level of detail doesn't look random. It looks informed. Almost as if the map was copied from a much older source, one created at a time when the land beneath the ice was still exposed, or at least partially known. Because if that's true, then someone saw Antarctica before we did. And that raises a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. Who? And just how far back does that knowledge go? But maps aren't the only things that seem out of place. Because thousands of miles away, high in the mountains of Peru, there's a structure that shouldn't physically exist the way it does. Sacsayhuaman. At first, it looks like a fortress, massive stone walls stacked in zigzag patterns overlooking the city of Cusco. But when you get closer, the scale becomes almost impossible to ignore. Some of the stones weigh over 100 tons. They aren't bricks, they aren't uniform. They are irregular, uniquely shaped blocks, cut and fitted together with such precision that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. No mortar, no gaps, just perfect contact. The official explanation is that the Inca built it using stone tools, manpower, and extraordinary craftsmanship. And there's no doubt the Inca were highly skilled. But here's what makes engineers pause. The stones aren't just placed, they're interlocked in complex, multi-angled joints, each one carved to match the exact contours of the stones around it. This isn't stacking, this is shaping at a level that would challenge even modern builders. And then there's the question of transportation. How do you move stones of that size up a mountain without wheels, without iron tools? Some researchers suggest lost techniques, methods of stoneworking or transport that haven't survived into modern times. Others go further. They propose that sites like Sacsayhuaman may have been built, or at least started, by a much older civilization. One's knowledge was later inherited or repurposed by the Inca. Because if this level of construction existed before recorded history, then the people we credit as builders may have been restorers. And this is where things start to feel even more unsettling, because the next discovery doesn't just suggest lost knowledge, it suggests lost time. Deep in the waters off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar scans revealed something unexpected. Geometric patterns, grid-like formations, structures that appear to be laid out with intention.
At first, it was dismissed as natural formations, but further analysis revealed objects, artifacts buried in the sediment, tools, pieces of wood, materials that eventually carbon dated. The results were shocking. Some estimates suggested an age of over 9,000 years. That's older than the earliest known cities, older than Mesopotamia, older than Egypt. The official stance remains cautious. Many researchers argue that the data is inconclusive, that underwater currents could have moved objects from different locations, mixing timelines and creating the illusion of a single ancient site. And that's possible. But this is what makes researchers uncomfortable. The layout, the geometry, the suggestion of streets or structures beneath the water. It looks planned. And if it is, then it points to a civilization that existed before the rise of everything we call civilization. A society that may have been lost not to war or collapse, but to rising seas. Because at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically, submerging vast coastal regions around the world. And if early civilizations existed along those coasts, then their cities wouldn't be ruins on land. They'd be gone, hidden beneath oceans we've barely explored. Which means what we've found so far might only be the beginning. And the final discoveries? They don't just suggest a lost civilization. They suggest something even harder to accept.
By this point, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Ancient structures that appear too early, maps that seem too accurate, ruins that shouldn't exist where they are or when they are. But the final discoveries don't just challenge history, they challenge the idea that history has been preserved at all. Because what if we're not looking at the first human civilization, but one of many? The seventh discovery begins in a place that feels almost unreal. High in the Andes, near Lake Titicaca, stands a structure known as Puma Punku. At first glance, it looks like a field of broken stone, scattered blocks, some overturned, others half buried. But then you look closer. These stones aren't random. They are precisely cut, symmetrical, engineered. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons. Others are shaped into perfect right angles with drilled holes and intricate grooves that seem designed to fit together like a massive three-dimensional puzzle. And this is where things don't add up. The stone used, andesite, is incredibly hard. Even with modern tools, cutting it with that level of precision is difficult. Yet here it is, carved thousands of years ago with no clear evidence of the tools used. The official explanation attributes Puma Punku to the Tiwanaku culture, dating it to around 500 to 1000 AD. According to archaeologists, skilled labor and time could account for its construction. And that may explain part of it, but not all of it, because some of the cuts are so exact, so consistent, that engineers have compared them to machine work. Straight lines, clean edges, repeating dimensions. This isn't rough stone shaping, it's precision. Some researchers believe Puma Punku may be the remains of a much older structure, one that was later reused or rebuilt by known civilizations. Others suggest something even more controversial, that whoever built it had access to techniques we don't fully understand. Because if this level of precision existed that long ago, then we may not be looking at primitive construction, we may be looking at lost engineering. And this is where things become truly unsettling, because the final discovery doesn't involve stone or maps or ruins, it involves memory. Across cultures, separated by oceans, by continents, by time, there is a recurring story, a story of a great civilization, one that existed long before the current world. A civilization that was advanced, powerful, and ultimately destroyed. In ancient Greek texts, it's called Atlantis.
In Indian traditions, there are accounts of lost cities swallowed by the sea. In Mesopotamian myths, there are stories of great floods sent to wipe the world clean. Even in the Americas, indigenous legends speak of previous worlds, destroyed and reborn. Different cultures, different languages, but the same core idea. Something came before, and it didn't survive. The official explanation is that these are myths, symbolic stories passed down through generations to explain natural disasters or moral lessons. And that makes sense. But here's what makes researchers pause. Why do so many of these stories describe the same event? A sudden catastrophe, rising waters, a lost civilization. And why do these stories appear in cultures that had no known contact with each other? This is where things stop feeling like coincidence and start feeling like memory. Not precise memory, not historical record, but fragments, distorted over time, passed down through generations until only the outline remains. Because if even part of these stories is based on something real, then the idea of a lost civilization isn't just speculation, it's a possibility. And if that possibility is true, then everything we've looked at, the structures, the maps, the submerged ruins, they're not isolated mysteries, they're pieces of the same puzzle. A puzzle we don't fully understand yet. Because maybe history didn't begin 5,000 years ago. Maybe that's just where it starts, after something else ended. Something older, something advanced, something we've almost completely forgotten. And maybe the reason we haven't found all the answers is because we're not just looking into the past, we're looking at the remains of a world that was never meant to be remembered. And if that's true, then the question isn't just what existed before us, it's this: what happened to it, and could it happen again?